So I'm here with the amazing Keris, who writes the Ladybird Purse and also your writer Substack,
Mm.
Happy Endings. But I guess this is more of a Ladybird Purse focused chat because Keris very kindly agreed to have a chat with me off the back of my sort of depressing piece that I've written about the
Yes.
finances of my film. Um, which I was kind of worried, a little bit nervous about. I felt a little bit like I was sort of walking into the room and, flashing my knickers. It's not the done thing, is it? Sort of to be honest about these numbers. But I don't know, I've had quite a sort of positive response, especially from people within the sort of documentary world. I think the sort of sense of relief in a way of
Mm.
saying like this is how it is. So, but this is the first time I've like talked to anyone about this stuff. So yeah, it's looking forward to it, especially with
It's
your
funny. Oh,
your
sorry, Phil.
on. Just because you've talked to so many, this is your bag, isn't it? You've thought a lot and talked to so many other people about a lot of these issues, so I'm sure you'll have some insights or some interesting questions.
Oh, I hope so. It's funny that you said it's like flashing your knickers because with author friends, I don't even know why. Years ago, we started comparing like advanced sizes to bra
Oh yeah.
sizes. So if somebody gets like a massive advance, it's a Dolly Parton. And most of us have got like training bras or not, or a vest, not even.
Great though
So
that
yeah,
you
why is it
share
everywhere?
those, that you talk to each other about that, because it
Yeah.
does just feel like there's this like omerta of we must not, especially with like creative stuff though, like we're sort of lucky to be doing it, so we should have
Yeah, exactly that.
talked
That's what
about
I
it.
was going to ask you actually. My first question was going to be because you quoted Amy McNee, who is
Yeah,
amazing and so open about money,
yeah.
about why we need to be more open in creative industries. And why do you think that is? Why do you think it's so secretive? And why do you think what's the value in being more open?
Well, I don't know, and it's like it goes right back. I mean, I've sort of got two experiences because my early years was working in TV, and at the time, it depends what your benchmark is and which direction you're comparing yourself in. But like I started work in 1999, and I came out of university, and quite a lot of my friends went off into graduate careers,
Mm.
lawyers and in the city and management consultants and things, that pretty quickly they were earning like to me insane amounts of money because I'm from
Yeah.
my mum didn't work and my dad was worked for the electricity board and then went to work at a greyhound racing track. He was a hairdriver at a dog track, so we didn't have a lot of money. So I was then these sort of amounts of money these people were earning seemed kind of crazy to me, and I was immediately went to work in TV and was working as a freelancer. And so I never had like a permanent job, but I was just earning money, and it did go up. It didn't go up to huge levels, but with the money sort of part of that, I suppose, was that you had your rate, you generally a weekly rate. And even then, like there was this real kind of, it was real like a whispering, it's like, well, what's your rate? And like there was no one ever told you like, when do you put your rate up? There's
Mm.
this kind of sense at a certain point that you would put your rate up a bit because you're a bit more experienced. But and it was only like years later, classic stuff. I mean, so this is, I guess, the noughties. There's a lot of re-evaluation of that time going on. Um, and one of the reasons why I sort of kind of left that industry really largely was, even at the time, but it's definitely in retrospect, there was just so much sexism and kind of racial bias going on. And I had a number of experiences with men my age, some not as experienced as me, who just were given all the opportunity, just given more opportunities faster than me. And then I was finding out like what they were earning for their weekly rate.
Yeah.
Like, well, why? We're doing literally the same job, because it's all this. You go in and you have a chat. There's no proper
Mm.
process, and then they say to you, "What's your rate?" And I would always, nobody had sort of talked to me about negotiating, so I would just say what I'd earned on the previous job.
Yeah.
But then,
Yeah.
how do you ever push your rate up? And so all of this was going on, and by the time I sort of left, which was, well, I sort of left in fits and starts, but I properly like went full time making this nuclear film after I got some investment, which is we set up a company to sell shares in the film. So it was mostly small, small amounts, sort of £500. But we had enough
Mm.
that I could like, I've got to go sort of full time on this film to get it finished. Still took loads of time after that because I had kids. But at that point, oh, I've lost my train of thought now. We're talking about the oh yeah, just where I was at. Like I was earning pretty decent money at that point,
Mm.
but then at the time I was like, well, this isn't great. Like I don't know, like, why am I not being remunerated to the same level as some of my peers? But then I look back in some ways at that is like a golden time now compared to then going out into the total wild west of independent stuff.
Yeah.
There's a much bigger kind of, I don't know, it there's just a huge there's a massive funding crisis, and it's got much worse, even in the last 5 years since my film came out, since I wrote that
Yeah.
film. The
So
situation.
how did you know how to even begin to get the finance for the film?
Well, this was part of the problem, like a lot of these things. If I knew then what I knew now,
Yeah.
so because I had come from TV, where I mean this model has broken down as well. I mean, TV is also factual TV, which is where I was working in documentaries, is in a sort of existential crisis as well at the moment with the streamers, and
Mm,
we've been in a big recession, and the advertising has gone, well, not gone, but it's collapsed. So there's huge issues. In some ways, I'm like, well, I didn't sort of leave. I feel a little bit like I was forced out of being in that industry. That's not completely true, but in some ways, like, maybe I'm lucky that I've got a bit of a head start on some of my colleagues who had stayed there, because I've already started thinking
because
about
you've already
stuff
done it. Yeah.
to do. Yeah. Um, but when I first came to say I'm going to make my own film, I was used to this model where in TV you would, you think of your idea, you're obviously researching that if you think it's an idea that's going to get an audience,
Mm,
the TV, the broadcasters would say, we're looking for programs about this or this. You had some guidance, but you'd pitch the idea, and then if, say, Channel 4 liked the idea, they would give the production company the budget to make that film,
right.
the budget, and then the production fee, which is a percentage of the budget on top, and that was the money that the company would kind of live from. The budget was the cost of making the program, and then
Right.
the production fee, and out of that they'd be paying people to come up with new ideas, and that was the business model. So that was kind of, I suppose, was sort of what I completely naively thought I would be able to replicate, like, not in the
Yeah.
business model. So I started doing it one day a week. I was freelancing, so I just said to my TV colleagues, I'm only working 4 days a week now because I'm making this independent film. Um, and so I just started researching like funds. So there are film funds, but now I look back, I kind of did budgets that were wildly optimistic, and
Mm,
also I was asking for like that. So I put in the applications for sort of like $80,000, which, one, it was like nowhere near enough, but also no
mm,
film fund, or very few film funds, are going to give you $80,000 for
mm.
the whole budget. So it was a real learning curve, and I quite quickly realized that it was going to be easy to raise money for short films. So I made a bunch of short films first. And, I did crowdfunding without knowing it was crowdfunding. I was just sort of trying. I mean, I think I was a bit kind of entrepreneurial in a way, because I just had this bit in my teeth that I wanted to do
Yeah.
this thing. I was just researching, all different kind of avenues. Like we did a little fundraiser at the pub with my friends. We did like a quiz, like a atomic film quiz, and I gave away a Sellafield pencil and an atomic kitten, and I raised a bit of money, a couple of £100 doing that. Like, I just had this like big spreadsheet of any bits of
Yeah.
I could kind of raise.
I
Um,
really like the idea of the emailing and asking everyone for a tenner. I thought that was, I've
yeah,
always thought, like years ago when I was on Twitter, I had like 6,000 followers. And I used to
yeah,
think, if every follower just gave me a
yeah,
pound,
yeah,
like that would be, all my worries would be over. That would
yeah.
be
In
great,
a
you
way,
know?
that's sort of
I
the
think
model
just
of
ask.
Substack, right? Isn't it? That's
Yeah,
kind of
just ask.
the dream. And there was a few people that were doing that. So I don't know. I just tried everything really. I was sort of just like
Yeah.
throwing anything at the wall, and I did get like. In fact, I've still got it. I've got a photo. Where is it? I've got a photocopy. Is it gone? Oh, here it is. This is not a real. So partly this is a bit aging. This is a photocopy. It's not the real. That's a check.
Oh,
Get the light on that.
yeah, I can't. Oh, there you go.
That was I got £5,000 grant written to Tenor Films in, when is that? July 2007. And that was the first actual grant that I got, which hence why I was so excited I photocopied it.
Yeah.
Um, obviously, £5,000 is a drop in the ocean, really, to the whole amount of the film. But I was doing that kind of probably for about 5 years, doing these little bits, making these short films, and then it was probably 5 or so years into that, and all through that same time, I guess I was getting more and more. That was around the time that I was starting to hear more about what other people were earning and seeing
Mm.
like peers of mine moving on and progressing, and I wasn't. And I had a bunch of sort of opportunities that then didn't happen for various reasons. And to start with, I was like, oh, that's bad luck. But then after about 2 or 3 cases of this sort of bad luck, I started thinking, well, is this bad luck, or is this, I don't know,
Mm.
it's the universe kind of telling me something that I should try and do something else. And so yeah, about 5 years in, I thought I need to get I've got quite far, but I need like somebody who properly knows what they're doing. And so at that point, then I started. I mean, I suppose because in making documentaries, you're always just like loads of people have said to me, how did I get all the interviewees in the film? Well, I mean, I just like sent people emails. Like that's what
Yeah.
the job of getting access for your film. So I've never been sort of shy of just doing cold calling sort of thing. Well, not literally calling, but just like reaching out to people unprompted. And I did that. I started doing that with producers and saying like, I want to make this film. And so that was around that point that I the guy who became my executive producer, and his company now is that they moved more into distribution. And I think he said to me, I don't know if he would remember this, but one of the things he said to me, he's very he's an amazing guy, very esteemed in the industry. And so I wasn't even sure that he'd get back in touch with me, but we met up for a coffee. And one of the things he said that had sort of impressed him was that I did have some kind of financial kind of plan. Like I was still working in TV, so I had some money kind of coming in, and I had been doing the things. I'd done the crowdfunding. Like I had met up with, I can't even remember I think it was somebody I knew locally in Brighton. It was like a friend of their husband or something who had quite a lot, was interested in environmental issues, and the husband had quite a bit of money. And so I'd met up with her, and we were sort of talking about whether her and her husband might. That was the beginning of the investment conversation.
Yeah.
So he was said he was impressed that I'd had kind of got to that point, and that he then sort of started helping me with that stuff, with trying to get investors. And then about that point was when we did finally go, I suppose, the more sort of traditional pitching route. I mean, I still, in a way, it's a bit like it feels to me a bit like winning the lottery. Like there's a handful of films that do get the funds,
and
the kind of industry money. I'm sure it's the same.
I mean, they get lottery funds.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but I mean, from I don't know, there are these handful of big film funds, and often the films that then end up that you see at Sundance or something, that but they're a very tiny proportion of most of the films that get made. Far more films would be made, scrabbled together the way I did it.
Yeah.
I think.
So, I'm sorry, were you going to say something else?
No, interrupt me because I'll just.
I don't know how. So, did you have an idea of how much you needed up front before you could start? I mean, or was it like rolling?
Kind of. It was a bit like how long is a piece of string? Because I mean, so when Dartmouth Films, Christo's company, sort of came on board, they did do a budget, and again, like I knew about budgets from my TV work, but by this point I had realised that these budgets were a bit sort of pie in the sky, really, because what you would film would be driven by how much money you've got, and it was a bit of a kind of chicken and egg all the way through. And so I was kind of filming stuff. I would get a bit of money. I'm trying to remember the sequence of this. So I did that original give me a tenner crowdfunding thing, and then a little bit later than that was when the actual official platforms like your Kickstarters, I don't think those existed when I did send that original 10,000 people give me £10 email. But then when they did start to exist, obviously I was all over that. I was like, oh, this is great. So I did, I think, 3 crowdfunding campaigns, and it was just, crowdfunding is so painful. But I did raise money from doing it, and each time I raised a little bit more money. The closer you got to the end, the easier it is to raise the money, because that's one of those things. It's like I just kind of knew that I would carry on doing it until I'd finished it, but there wasn't really a way I could sort of bottle up that certainty that I had that I would do that for anything else. I was just saying to people, I'm going to do this. and they would have to kind of take a leap of faith in me that I
Yeah.
would, because not everybody would. I mean, I've crowdfunded things that sounded cool and then they never finished.
Yeah.
I mean, only for like £10. So you're like, well, it's a little, it's karma into the creative, you know,
Yeah.
ether. But it does happen, it's really hard to make films. So, people start, they get a bit of money and then they don't get all the money. And so they don't finish it, or life happens and they can't carry on with it.
Yeah.
So yeah, there was I guess the further to the end you got, the more I was able to say, look, here's what we've done. So now we just need this
Yeah.
money to finish it off. But there was also a kind of learning piece all the way, or teaching in a way, because I think people just don't. That's another reason I think why I wanted to write this piece, was to actually break down for people who just watch films, like actually all the bits that go into it.
Yeah. It's never even, I mean, it's fairly recently I went to see a film, an animated film. And
Animation is so expensive.
God, yeah. But it was at the start of it, Robot Dreams, it's
Yes.
called. And at the start of the film, the production companies, I guess, that came, all of the different companies that came up, took like about 5 minutes. And it got to the point where me and my son were laughing, because it was just like, is this going to be the whole film? Just listing the production companies. And because there was so many, well, because there was so many, and it would be I've started noticing it since, as the BBC, and it would be Channel 4 and different ones that you recognise. But because there was so many in that Robot Dreams, it really stood out and made me think, oh, actually, it can be 50 production companies that are involved. Before I just thought, oh, a company has made a film.
There'll usually be a company that's making it, but those companies are funding it, and as the
funding it,
that was one of I suppose one of the benefits of the way I did it. I mean, it's not. I don't know. I think I would much rather. I don't know if I would rather have been fully funded. It's a thought experiment, but I didn't have. If you got all of those companies you're seeing at the beginning, because they're putting money, they've all got like a right to have an opinion. And
that's what I was thinking. All of those companies, you need to keep them happy.
All these viewings and take notes from all of these different companies, and sometimes those notes are going to be conflicting. And then how do you? There's like a lot of kind of politics, I think, of managing all the different funders. I didn't have that because I didn't really have. I mean, I had like these investors who were really a part.
Well, that's what I was thinking. You had like a grant and a limited company and investors and all the people who gave you so you did have a few different.
Suppose they were all people. The investors were almost all of them were like friends and family, apart from one guy who I didn't previously know but was introduced to me by somebody, and even he was a wealthy guy, and he gave me what I can't remember. I think gave me, I shouldn't say, but he invested. He was the biggest. I think it might have been £5,000. Which was quite a big sum in terms of my investors. Most of them were giving me 1,000, but equally, obviously, that's £1,000 is a lot of money for somebody to put into somebody else's project. This is the limited company thing. So this was all the research that we did, and unfortunately, this scheme has gone now. But there was a scheme at that time called the Seed Enterprise Investment Scheme, which was for kind of business startups, and this was where Christo was really great, but also I think that background I had of being kind of entrepreneurial and any like possible avenue I could explore. So we were like, well, let's see if this will fly with HMRC, and it did, but it doesn't now. It was kind of used by some but much bigger. There were kind of, I think, hedge funds that came in and people were putting money into some of these schemes, but basically it was a scheme where so that there are Tenor Films Limited is the company that was set up to make that film. So they are shareholders in that film. And, in some incredibly unlikely universe, especially unlikely now we're 5 years in, but, should I have made some life-changing sale if it had gone to Sundance or something, and, it's got, again, that's gone now, but a few years ago, there was the odd film that was making, millions of dollars in sales to Netflix or to Apple Plus or whatever. That's kind of gone away now, but there was a moment when that was happening. Had that have happened, had there been actual profit, then my investors would get a share of that profit, and I would have been absolutely over the moon if I could return some profit to those people. But that's
And you would get paid
Well, so
because you didn't get paid.
there's a sort of agreement which feels a bit like it's meaningless really, but the agreement is that obviously myself and Christo, who never got paid,
Right.
the company owes us the money for our time on work.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing out of this imaginary windfall. We'd get paid. Then there was some money. Then there's the loan money,
Mm.
which is real money. So that the money we didn't get paid isn't real money in the sense that it's just money that's never didn't exist and was not paid, but it should have done.
Yeah.
We should
Yeah.
have. Then there's the loans, which is actual real money from my bank account that I was shoveling in over the years.
Yeah.
Is it's quite frightening, really. I don't know. People choose to spend their money on different things, but it's a lot of money. It's up close to £100,000. Some of that is not exactly. It's a bit complicated because there's some of it is kind of paper money that we sort of moved around to make that imaginary money that we should have been paid exist to get tax credit on it. But half of that probably I don't know. I've never done these sums and I don't really want to, but probably 50 grand or more of that is actual money where I would have put in 3 grand or 2.5. Like when I had bills to pay, because I paid everybody else. Everybody else was paid.
Yeah.
Everybody else was paid to the level they'd be paid at if they were doing a program for the BBC. But they were all paid what they asked to be paid, and mostly quite close to their commercial rates. I never asked anybody else to do anything, for free or
Actually, it just reminded me that you'd messaged me that you'd paid off a debt before you were celebrating paying off
credit card debt. So I was looking at your questions that your Ladybird Purse questions, and one of them is you often say is like, what would you do with £10,000? And it's been such a default to me for so many years. I'd pay off the credit card debts, and then I was like, oh, I have paid off the credit card debts. I was like, well, what? I couldn't conceive of actually having like a plus £10,000 in. I mean, actually, I still do. I owe other money elsewhere that's not credit card debts, but it's not as much as £10,000. But so that it goes back to the original. I mean, I've got really good at. I've got like 7 or 8 credit cards. I mean, this is one of the things I guess that is to my advantage is I'm sort of good with money. Like I've always I can make. I kind of not play the system, but back in the day when interest rates were kind of higher, back in the before the crisis, and I was earning reasonable money, I was doing that thing where you take out a credit card, put some money into your credit account, some savings, and move it around. And I was doing that, and I wasn't making loads of money, but things like that, I'd always kind of been doing things like that. So, but then the credit card, it was more initially the first big chunk of money was from 2013. So, I mean, it's well over a decade since I took these loans out. That was to pay for the filming. So, my son was born at the beginning of 2014, and I did most of the big chunk of the interviews, and the filming was in kind of the back end of 2013. So, I was pregnant, and I did a big 3-week trip around America. And I knew I had to go then because obviously I was about to have a baby and I wouldn't have been able to go. And I didn't have enough. That was one of the rare times, mostly, well, I think it was the only time filming wise, up until we got into the edit, things when the cost of everything ballooned. But before then, I only filmed stuff when I had I would raise money, then I would do filming. So it was step by step. But for that, in 2013, I knew I couldn't wait because I would not be able to do it once I had a baby.
Yeah.
So I put a lot of, flights, hotels, everything I could on credit card then. Interest-free credit, I mean, that also, there's thinking about all this privilege, because I had a decent income earlier for a while, I was able to sort of coast that I had, and also the time period when they were giving out credit cards like sweets,
Yeah, seriously.
I had a lot of credit cards, but then they did hit a point 3 or 4 years after that when I just ran out of money because I'd stopped working. I'd stopped earning any money. I couldn't get back into TV, and I've been spending this money on the film and childcare, huge money on childcare, and I didn't have enough money to pay my tax bill, and I had to borrow several £1,000s off of my mum and my one of my best friends. And at that point, I was like, I think I need to look into doing another one of these, like, do money. I think one of my maybe my interest free period was running out. So I was like, I need to move.
Yeah.
And then when I was applying for new cars, I got turned down both because I didn't have any income, and
Yeah.
suddenly all that had gone away. But I did then come back. I did get a job for probably about 18 months after my son started at nursery when we got the. This is where all the intersection with the childcare stuff, right? So
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that too.
once I got
Yeah.
the hours, the funded hours, and so I had more time because he was in nursery, because I couldn't afford very much childcare before that because I had no money. So it was like
Yeah.
everything was coming in was going on the childcare. Well, nothing was coming in actually. I'm getting confused. That in that first period, it was nothing was coming in. It was all just coming off credit cards. Once he started at nursery, that stopped. The childcare outgoings went, and they didn't go to nothing, but they went very much
Yeah.
lower. And I had more hours, so I did manage to get. I mean, I got a job in at a TV company in Brighton, but it was at a. I was about half going talking about my rates. In the end I had took a job at about half the rate I'd been on before I
Mm.
left in 2012, because I had like very poor sort of negotiating. I wasn't in London anymore, and I couldn't
Yeah, but this,
travel.
like you said
I
at
had
the beginning, it's hard to know because I mean, I interviewed someone fairly recently, and she works in tech,
mhm,
and she went for an interview, and she was expecting the same. She based when they said like, what do you want to
yeah,
be paid or whatever. I can't. It's been so long since I had a proper job. I can't remember what the
yeah,
terminology is. Um, and she said what she was being paid in her current job.
yeah.
And fortunately, the interviewer said, um, that's way below the going rate. You should actually be earning considerably more than that.
But
And like,
even
I'll
that
ask you,
chance of somebody
yeah,
being
I'll
kind of
ask
nice
you
and decent
again.
enough to
Yeah,
say that.
yeah, because so many places would have just said, great, bargain.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
you'd be getting paid half your rate. So she ended up like, literally it was like 50% increase on her
Wow.
previous
The
um
specific context with this job that I ended up taking was they were actually, it's a slight side issue, but I found it interesting. They were actually really a radio company. So there are some TV companies, quite a few TV companies in Brighton. Um, but I got a little bit far up the road with a few people. There was one company who were like, we're really family friendly. Because I said, because my partner he works 4 days a week. So there's one day a week. I was like, I could come to London. I could be in the office. This was before the pandemic, right? So
yeah,
working remotely was not really a thing.
yeah,
I was like, but I had been doing that a little bit in that time when I was moving. I went from 4 days a week working in TV, doing this film on the side, then I went down to 3 days a week, and I'd been kind of gradually. And some of those days I would do at home because I was still working for a company in London then. So I knew it could work because I'd been doing it. So I said, if I come in one day a week, I want to do 3 days a week. I could do 2 days at home and one day in the office. And they were like, we're really family. It was two young guys in their 30s who both had kids. They were like, oh, we're really family friendly, really,
mm,
we're all like, how we're going to make it work. And then all of a sudden, I don't know what happened, but they emailed me and they said, we've been thinking about it and we really value, face to face time with our team. So it's not going to work out for us.
mm,
So that didn't happen. And then similar things, I didn't get as far. That was the closest I'd got with a sort of bigger TV company. And then I went for an interview at this really a radio company in Brighton, and they were so lovely, and I had a lovely time working there. They were hoping to get into doing more TV work because the money in radio, I just could not get over when he told me they're a big, very successful radio. They're called Peer Productions. I'm sure they won't mind me mentioning them. If you listen to Radio 4 ever, you've probably heard their name. They do loads of big dramas with big superstar acting talent. Um, but the amount of money that radio, the budgets for radio. So
mm.
I was coming at a time from us like a TV hour when I first started in TV in like the turn of the millennium was about £150,000 was the budget for an hour of factual TV, which is obviously paying all the people. It's
Yeah.
paying, well, you've seen from the breakdown of my piece, like all that's covering all of those things. But that was 20 years ago, 25 years ago. A TV hour for like say Archive on 4, a Radio 4 documentary was like £8,000 an hour.
Oh.
And then they would do a lot of like book at bedtimes, which are sort of 15 minutes. They would get £1,200 for an episode. And I was like, so what? I just, it blew my mind because the amount
Yeah.
of work, just because it's radio, I know there's no cameras, but I mean,
Yeah.
the amount of work is not.
Everybody still needs to get paid.
It was
Yeah.
so this company were really hoping to try and move into TV to, earn some more money. And so I started working for them, but they were in radio, they were paying me basically what they paid their radio team, what they could afford to pay. And I just thought, well, 3 days a week at like radio money is still more money than nothing, which is what I've had for years. So that's what, and I did that for kind of 18 months or so before I then, I went off. My daughter was born in middle of March 2020, just before everything shut down.
No.
The film was coming in the summer, was booked in the cinemas of summer. So when I left that company in like February 2020 to go on maternity leave, and my film was due to come out shortly after, the plan was I was going to go back there, I don't know, a couple of days a week or something, but I couldn't. Like they really struggled to keep afloat through the pan, and I still think they're still struggling a bit now. So I've completely lost where we were.
No, you mentioned the having your children as well while you were making the film,
right,
the intersectionality. Did I say intersexuality? Intersectionality, different thing. But I noticed that with the crew on your website for the film, you're the only woman, and then there's like 15 men.
It was, do you know what? It was, so when I did to get the UK film tax credit, you have to fill out this thing with the BFI called the cultural test. And it's like a point system, and you qualify. So there you get points for the subject matter being about British, you get points for British crew and cast. You get points for like, so if you edit, so like a lot of Hollywood films or, American foreign films are shot in the UK or edited in the UK, and they qualify for the film tax credit through, or they do their visual effects in the UK. And one of the things is there's a diversity sort of section, and it was only when I was doing that I really realised how I was. Well, I wasn't. So I had an archive producer. She was a woman, and I had a couple of because a lot of times it was people that would kind of dip in and they would just work with me for a few weeks on a bit of so I did have a few other women that worked very briefly, but all the kind of main, the camera, the sound, the editing, the composer, the executive producer, they were all men. And obviously the film itself is predominantly men. That's a kind of a product of what it's about. But I hadn't thought of that, because when I was making the film, I was sort of going really to people I already knew, or to kind of recommendations. The camera people were people I had already worked with, and the sound. The editors, I was looking for somebody that would be local to me in Brighton because I had a baby. And so, I was just asking around for recommendations, and I feel kind of embarrassed, really. It's something that I'm going to be much more mindful of on anything I do going.
Well, they say is it a much more, I mean, presumably it is a much more male-dominated industry anyway.
It's not lower down, but there's just there's almost no women in their 40s left. By the time, I'm in my late 40s, almost everybody, there's a small handful of women that I kind of sort of came up through the industry with who are still there and who are doing really, really well. And I don't know why I do this to myself, really, because I didn't want to go on that path. That's why I stepped away to make my own film. But I see a few of these women who have stayed in the industry and they're doing really, really well. Like they're working on big things, well funded and getting lots of acclaim and stuff. And I know they'll be being well paid for that. But mostly, by far, the majority of all of the women that especially if they've had kids. In fact, I think there's only one woman I can think of who's almost more in management, really, who has had kids and is still in TV. The only couple of others I can think of don't have kids, so I think that's not.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, why is that? Why have they left? But that is presumably why
it's
they have
just
left.
So unfamily friendly, and also it's a sort of self-perpetuating thing. And there's been all of this.
So not necessarily not family friendly, because presumably some of the men have families.
Yes. But they're not. But they're not. Yeah, they're not the ones that
Yeah.
the school pick up, or
Mm.
Um,
The men who say, like, I mean, I don't know because I don't know the men or the situation, but the men who said we're a family-friendly company presumably have wives looking after their
yes,
kids for them.
completely. I mean,
Yeah.
that's one. That was one of the ones that really stuck in my throat. That we're so family friendly because we've got kids. Yeah,
Mm.
and the guys that I came up through the industry with, who are still all doing really well, most of them have got kids. I mean, it hasn't
Yeah.
been. And then I think it's the same with all other kinds of diversity. Really, like I don't think it's mostly actual kind of anti-women or anti-non-white people or
Yeah.
anti-disabled people. It's just that the structural things
Offers.
force
Yeah.
those people out, and then the people who are
Yeah.
left are your white, straight, able-bodied, middle class,
Yeah.
privately educated, all of these things. And so then people hire unless they're sort of like me. I was a perfect example of it. It just wasn't. I didn't wasn't thinking about it, so I didn't. I was just hiring people that I knew who turned out
Yeah.
to be basically white men.
But also, you said as well, the class barriers,
Yeah,
which is
that's
similar
another.
in publishing, and it just didn't because I kind of always think, what am I doing wrong? It's taken me so long till a friend started talking about class that I was like, oh, so many of the things that I thought was me is actually, yeah,
It's that same
it's
thing about not being fed. I think was it your most recent Ladybird Purse, or I can't remember, or a recent one where somebody was talking about how people don't talk about how they bought their houses,
yeah,
and so much of this
never occurred to me. So
unspoken
it didn't
what
occur to me.
parents are doing. So I've never had any money from
Yeah,
my parents because my parents don't have any
no,
money to give me. But
yeah,
equally, I've got massive privilege. I went on a scholarship to a private school.
hmm,
So I've got a lot of rich friends, and then I went to Cambridge, and so there's a cachet in that. It hasn't been a financial cachet, but contacts, networks.
yeah.
I
I
knew.
went to Salford University. There's no cash there.
I mean,
In fact,
100%.
a friend who I was at Salford with had an interview, and she got first, and the interviewer said, "Oh, you got first? That's," and then looked at her CV and went, "Oh, from Salford though."
I shouldn't be
That's the
surprised
first,
by that.
right?
It's
No.
just awful, isn't it? I don't know, but that's been a sort of it's been extremely eye-opening, obviously. But I sort of didn't notice some of this. I think is literally just like a luck of my age. So
Mm.
like I got onto the property ladder. This is just massive fortune. And I can't really believe when I look back at my younger self. So I bought a flat with a friend, which wasn't even really a close friend of mine. She was somebody I knew from university. She was a friend of mine, but she was not like a really close friend. But we were in a house share. And we started in like the early 2000s when like location had just started. We used
Mhm.
to go and look at flats in London like on a Saturday afternoon and then go to the pub. It was just like a lark, just like nose around
Yeah.
flats. Because I guess that was the era. And then one day, this estate agent rang us about this flat and said, like the because obviously when you would look around, we'd pretend that we were like
Yeah. Yeah.
interested or like play acting. Um, and she phoned and she said the vendor is really keen to sell and want to drop the price. Like, are you seriously interested? Like, I need to know, by the end of play today. And I was like, oh, shit suddenly got real here. And like I
Mm.
phoned my friend and I saw we were sort of like giggling. We were 25 or something. We were like giggling over the phone. And it was so, I mean, this was that time when they were just giving out mortgages. So at that time, so she was a trainee corporate solicitor. So
Mm.
she was earning much more than me, but she wasn't earning like huge money then, but she was going to be earning huge money. And I had earned, I think, like 9 grand the previous year freelance. So that was not guaranteed I'd earn the 9 grand the following year, but and we were borrowing 90 grand each. So it's still a
Oh,
big
wow.
investment, but
Yeah.
they, I just and the actual mortgage payments were only about the same as my rent. So because I knew this basically wealthy person through having gone to this rich university, which I was able to do probably because I got a scholarship to a private school. It's all entwined.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I'm really conscious of that. Like there's a sliding door path when I didn't do that and I didn't know all of those people. But I got onto the property ladder then. Um, Whereas my partner is 5 years older than me, but he worked for the NHS. He was not, he had never earned enough money to have a deposit to buy anywhere. It's only when we
Mm.
moved to Brighton that he had been saving for years. And I just had all this money, this like magic money tree money from this flat that I'd bought at the edge of the
Yeah.
line. It had gone up, like had like 50 grand from having been lucky enough to get onto the property ladder at a moment when it was possible.
Yeah.
And the me of like 10, if I'd have been 10 years younger, or I do sort of think like, how, I don't know, how does like a young person going to London now to want to work in TV, and let that, it's only
I'll do
possible
it.
if you, it's just,
I just don't know how they can. I know the like the pay for publishing.
yeah.
When I left London, I lived in London for like 10 years. And when I left, I was working in a record company. I was PA to the head of legal and business affairs. And this was I left in 97. And I was earning 18 grand then. And he didn't want me to leave. I was moving back up north. And he didn't want me to leave. And he said, if I will train you to be a paralegal, and you will put your pay up to 22,000 a year if you stay. Now, publishing jobs are being advertised now, paying less than 22,000 a year.
Yeah.
That was 1997.
Yeah.
And when we lived in my husband then was, he works in the civil service. So he was on a decent wage, not massive.
Yeah.
But even living in London then, we weren't comfortable by any stretch.
Yeah.
We couldn't afford holidays, and that's what, almost 30 years ago. And the pay in publishing hasn't
I grew
increased.
up in London, and I don't know, like, it's what's happened to it. When we moved to Brighton, I did kind of know, like, we will never move back to London. Like,
we can never go back. Yeah.
But I don't regret it. I love living in Brighton, and Brighton is kind of, I mean, I feel a little bit guilty sometimes because we were one of the earlier people, but this whole like down from London, there's all the people like me that couldn't afford to live in London or that have come down here, and now there's a massive housing crisis in Brighton from all the down from.
Sorry, I keep shaking my desk.
Okay. But yeah, so much like that class thing, and it's only, I didn't sort of notice it. Well, I noticed it in terms of certain like etiquette things. I mean, I'd had kind of rough edges knocked off me a bit at university, and learned some of the ways of the higher class folk, the language stuff. But so much of that stuff is just unspoken, isn't it? And you don't. It's like this code that you've got to sort of learn.
Yeah.
But financially,
kind of the confidence of it. That's something that I noticed the big difference of me feeling grateful for opportunities, or me feeling like I'm lucky, and other people. The kind of entitlement. I mean, entitlement something that
stuck with me when I was about probably, like 15, 16 kind of age at my school. And I remember one of my friends I can't remember the context of this conversation, but she was like, like by the time I don't remember what age she said, like in her mid-20s or something. She was like, well, I mean, I'll be earning 30,000 by the time I'm whatever the age was. And that was sort of like double what my dad was earning at that time. Yeah. And this was like a 15-year-old girl who just said with supreme confidence, and she probably is right. She probably, I mean, I'm not stayed in touch, so I don't know what she did when I do, but
and even now, I mean, I'm almost 54, and even now sometimes I see what people are earning, and I just think, like, the thought of earning 100 grand a year is unimaginable to me. I just can't.
Nobody in your circle has ever earned anything like that. It just seems seems like fantasy. But then I can imagine the flip side of that, when everybody does do that, then it's just simple. I suppose it's a bit like how you get, like, in families of doctors, they all become doctors because it's kind of normal. You become a doctor, whereas, I don't know. I mean, obviously, you can go to medical school and train and become a doctor. It's not like I couldn't do that, but it wouldn't have occurred to me.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Oh no, yeah, that was another thing that, because I started out. Well, first of all, when I moved to London, I was a mother's help. It was called the job then, because I didn't know how to move to London without a job and have somewhere to live because I didn't have any money.
Well,
I literally went to London on a National Express coach with no money.
But that's confidence, right? That's confidence.
Well, yeah, I can't believe nowadays. I was 18. I can't believe I did it. But also, I can't believe that my parents let me go to London with literally no money. I must have had like a fiver to get to Richmond Station, because then the woman that I was working for I was living
lined up the mother's help before you went.
Yeah,
right.
From the what's the lady
from the Lady magazine. I remember.
But then they obviously were quite well, the as it turned out, the husband's family was like a that's when I learned about old money versus new money, which I wasn't aware of
Yeah, yeah,
before.
yeah. I
They were
learned
old
about
money,
that at school. Yeah,
and she like had married in, and she you wouldn't have known she was very kind of slow and rangery. And then I met her family, who were all like Cockneys and all really lovely
oh,
and
how
friendly. And I was like, oh,
interesting.
interesting.
That's so
So that's
interesting.
when I learned all of the, that you're not supposed to say toilet. And,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I learned all of the things I was doing wrong. And I
Yeah.
was like, toilet
Like
is
the
much more formal
cutlery and
than
things.
loo. Yeah, all that kind of
You're
stuff.
not supposed to talk
Um,
to people circulating with the food. You're not supposed to talk to them. You're supposed to sort of go like that,
yeah.
take the canapé.
Well, once they had a party and they asked me to like serve at the party, and that was eye-opening as well. But either not spoken to at all or spoken to. I remember a man coming up and saying, like, "Are you the woman who does?" or something, and I was like, but I forgot. Oh, so then after that, I got like a admin job, like a secretarial job, and then I couldn't get out of it. I couldn't get out of admin. I literally couldn't. I didn't know what jobs were. Like
Yeah.
outside of admin, I couldn't. And I would think, well, I could do something else. And I'd get the newspaper at the time with the jobs. And I'd end up just circling all of the admin jobs because I literally had no idea what
If you
else
don't know somebody
I
who
could
can like
do.
tell you about that world,
No,
kind of, introduce,
no.
like, I there's so many things when I look back over, my life, and I just feel like so many kind of moments of luck, or like a bit like you were saying, that person in their job interview where just that one person
Mm,
said you should be earning twice that. Like my
yeah.
first ever, so I knew I wanted to work in TV because I was at this, posh school. We did work experience. No, all kids do work experience, but or a lot of kids do. I don't know if they all do, but we did. And because I was at this posh school, I did Radio 4 work experience because
Oh,
it was
wow.
my friend of my teachers. And I mean, I'd never listened to we listened to Capital Radio, Capital Gold in my house, so we didn't listen to Radio 4. Um, but I really just really loved it. And then I was like, oh, then I did some work experience when I was at university because my parents moved away from London when I was I was 17. I hadn't quite finished school, so another story. But I ended up kind of lodging with some people to finish school,
Mm,
but they had moved up to East Midlands. So I was like writing to radio stations around Nottingham and stuff, and I got some work experience at BBC East Midlands, like in the holidays. And it was a couple of days radio and a couple of days TV. And I did the TV stuff. I was like, this is great. This is even better than
mm.
radio because it's all the radio stuff and pictures. So then that's kind of, and I joined like the film society at college and stuff. So I kind of knew that's what I wanted to do. And then I graduated and I went to my parents up in the East Midlands and I signed on for job seekers allowance, which then I was allowed to do for, I think it was, can't remember, maybe 12 weeks. It was like a number of weeks you could do when you had finished a course
Mm,
where you could apply for anything. You didn't just have to take any job. You could like be
yeah,
applying for jobs to do with your
yeah,
course. And I was just coming to the end of that time, and then I would have had to basically take like a factory job or something because that was
yeah.
or an agricultural picking job or something because that's what there was around in the East Midlands around where my parents were. Um, and in that whole time, I was writing off letters. Well, I guess it wasn't completely pre-internet, but I didn't have an email address then.
No.
I was sending off my letters to all the production companies, mostly in London, but also kind of to anywhere really. And then I got a call from this company in Leeds, um, and he needed somebody, and I drove up to Leeds. And it's this a bit like you going to London at the age of 18. Like I didn't really have a plan. I really I liked this guy. He was in a fix because he had hired somebody else who then had not told him she was also applying for the BBC graduate training scheme, and then she got the BBC graduate training scheme and just was gone.
Mm,
So he needed somebody quickly. Um, and it was about 90 minutes away from where my mum and dad lived to Leeds. And he was basically like, can you start on Monday? And I was like, because I'd never had a job interview. I now know this was just how it is. It's a chat. You come in and you
yeah.
have, because I'd been to, he was a very lovely guy. He's no longer alive. He was such a nice guy, but very, very posh. And he'd been to Oxford. And I think the fact that I'd been to Cambridge,
Hmm.
that was definitely a factor. But he just, he took a chance on me and he said, can you start on Monday? And I was like, well, I mean, my parents live down in Nottinghamshire, but then I was like, oh, but I've got a friend who lives in Halifax. And because I'm such a southerner, I didn't really, Leeds and Halifax, I kind of thought,
Yeah. Yeah, near enough.
Actually, they're not that close. So I rang my friend. I said, "Can I sort of stay with you and your mum and dad, like until I find somewhere to live in Leeds?" And she was like, well, "Okay." Oh, because I did actually another bit of privilege. When my parents, so I was 17 when my parents moved away, and I think I had just passed my driving test, like a couple of weeks before they moved. And they did this is what so this is one thing I did get from my parents, and I shouldn't say I never got anything. They bought me a little Ford Fiesta,
Mm.
so I did have a car. So I was able to get up to Leeds in this little car, and then I was able for about 3 weeks to do this commute up the M62 from Halifax to Leeds while I was trying to find a flat. Um, but that sort of first break
Yeah.
was what got me into it, and I stayed in Leeds for like about a year, and then they were a small company. I mean, things have changed a lot now. There's not very many of the kind of small sort of one-man band production companies left now. They've all been, it's been a lot of consolidation, but there were, because they were set up by individual filmmakers really, so they'd often be like one project to one project to one project, and then if there was a gap, then there was no work. And so I started, because I was from London and all my friends, all my university friends were in London. I was like, well, I'm going to, maybe like now is when I should move back to London. And then the first several years I was doing temping in between, like office temping and stuff. And I would I'd get like, the contracts would be like.
That's how I got my record company job, actually, for temp. I signed up to a music industry temp agency, and then I got kept on.
Yeah.
So well, what I wanted to ask is, I probably have to wrap up soon, don't we?
Yeah.
But so you ended up well, first of all, I wanted to ask what the response has been like to your Substack post. You said that you've had some nice feedback.
It's been good, yeah. I mean, I think so probably what I expected really. Like people who don't, who aren't in the documentary world, I think have just found it really. I mean, I expected that because when I was making it, when I would talk about the numbers, but I think it's even that's even more extreme now because you can make content. I don't really like that word, but just with your iPhone and AI now as well. You can whip something up.
Yeah.
And that's not what I do. Like the documentaries that we make aren't that. Like they take a long time, and that's where the most of the money is going, is on people's time. And film. I had like proper professional director of photography with lights and lenses and really like it's like a film set. It's what you see on a film set. That all costs money. And I think, but then, and the other thing, and there's one thing I sort of wanted maybe to write into more is the archive as well. That was a real killer for me. And I mean, it's a slightly self-inflicted blow because I didn't need to make a film with all this archive in it. But like,
footage,
that's where, because I was just making it for myself, that's the like, that is the privilege. Like I was saying, you don't have the commissioners, you don't have the notes, you don't have anyone telling you. When I first started, I said I was going to do this thing. So many TV colleagues said what I should do was it would be me, a film about me, Vicky Leslie, goes off to investigate nuclear power. And I was like, that's so boring. Like, who am I? I'm just like some person. Why would I watch just some person going around a nuclear power station? But that's kind of a very TV way of thinking, that it's presenter. And it's just like, I don't want to do that. Like, that's really boring. Like, I want to hear from actual people in this world, and because I got very interested in the history, that then sort of inevitably led me down an archive route. But it's another, and it's much, much worse now. Getty have just kind of pretty much bought up, or they're now managing almost every archive that there is, and I'm 100% sure I would not be able to clear all that archive that I had in my film now. Even 5 years later, I wouldn't be able to do it. And that is a real big issue, which again I just think people don't think about and appreciate. And obviously people put all kinds of.
Wouldn't even occur to me.
They put it all on YouTube, and YouTube, they might get a takedown notice. You see that quite often, don't you? You go to watch something and the owner has taken down. But it's a bit like whack-a-mole. I mean, I found my film online, and the distributors have put in takedown requests.
Well, I mean, with books, that's just
it's getting worse, isn't it? With the
and
also with the archive, another thing that's happened that Christo was telling me about, that's happened since, even just in that 5 years since my film came out, there are companies they've got AI bots basically crawling the internet looking for their property, for their IP, and coming
Oh,
after you. Um, so one of the things that documentary filmmakers and journalists, I guess, fall back on to some extent with copyright material is the fair use or fair
yeah,
dealing. In America, they call it fair use. It's more limited in the UK. They have more, freedom of speech is a sort of more of a founding principle in America, supposedly.
yeah.
But the fair use kind of conditions are broader in America. But in the UK, we have something called fair dealing, and you can use copyright material within, so you can use quotations, there's
Yeah.
criticism and review, which is what I felt I used, because I was talking about like the PR of the nuclear industry. And so when we used like adverts, we didn't clear the copyright on those on the basis that we were fair dealing it, because we were
Yeah.
discussing the way that those adverts were used and the messaging and stuff. But all of this stuff it's just interpretation, and in theory, a rights holder could come after you. Fair dealing is a legal defense.
Mm.
Only it's a legal defense you can employ in court if somebody comes after you. But we took the view that it's not that likely that anybody would see this film, and if they did, like, we haven't got any money, so what are they gonna? What's the point of coming after us anyway? But the thing is, now it's becoming automated, and there are these AI bots kind of crawling over the internet looking for stuff. The risk then, or you could still make your fair dealing defense, but you
Mm.
actually have to go to court to do that. And with
Yeah,
all
the expense of that.
so it's like really kind of putting this chilling effect on being able to use other material. And also, obviously, there's a huge conversation that started up in the last probably year or so ago around AI and archive. Like, how are we going to know that the archive is actually archive and it's not just?
Mm.
There's some extraordinary things I've seen where like AI created kind of gold rush Hollywood streets,
Yeah.
and it looks
Yeah.
totally good until you look at it, and suddenly there's like, can't think of what it, but something in there like a car or something, that something that's historically could not have been there, and the AI's just hallucinated
Yeah.
it, but you wouldn't know it at first glance. But then
No.
that's degrading our sort of shared historical kind of
Yeah. But
experience.
also, I mean, those little mistakes that are happening now, but it's improving so quickly that before
Yeah.
long, I mean, my 16-year-old tested me the other day, showing me some photos, like if I could tell which ones were AI, and I got them all right. He was really surprised that I got them all right, because I've posted a couple of things on Instagram, and he'll message me and say that's AI.
Oh
So
wow.
I think he was planning to like shame me for but I got them all right. But they were, it was borderline. They were really,
Yeah.
really good.
Even just
Um,
every month it's getting better, isn't it?
yeah,
So it becomes this
it's
thing then
really
that you have
scary.
to, well, you're seeing it in writing as well, aren't you? People kind of saying having an
Yeah.
AI policy, and kind of people have to actively say and claim, like stake out their.
I've had AI reviews on my books. I had a review on NetGalley, which is like for preview
AI
for advanced
review.
reviews. Yep. So this AI, I've seen AI reviews on Amazon. Don't even know what the point of that is. The AI review on
Did you see the
NetGalley.
article in one of the American newspapers? It published
Oh my God, yeah,
a
the
whole
whole,
article of
yeah,
completely made up
yeah.
books.
Yeah, it was syndicated as well, apparently. That's just absolutely ridiculous. So that's not even just the fact that someone got AI to write it. Nobody checked it. There's no
That's the thing. That's the
sub-editors,
other
no
thing. So that
editors.
those it's a real big issue for
Yeah.
films. The people who have the money, this is where I guess crowdfunding or things like Substack, where you can be speaking directly to people who might want to support your work, will become more and more important, I suppose. But
Yeah.
the institutional money, corporates and public broadcasters and people like that, and they're under their own various financial pressures, and are they going to still want to pay for a real human to do it if they think they can get it done just as
Well,
well?
no, they're
Fine.
not, because that's already
They're
happening,
not
isn't
going
it?
to. But
Yeah, they're
then
not.
but then these mistakes are just going to keep happening, and then people just kind of get inured to it and go, well, and then
And I think, I mean, I saw a thing that said that do they even care? Because like when you go on like a local newspaper website now, you can barely find the news between all
oh
of the adverts and the
yeah,
pop-ups and the nonsense. And I was like, what is even the point? And the point is they're still getting the money.
yeah,
So do they even care that you can't read the
yeah,
articles? It's really scary.
it's
But
scary.
so I was going to ask you,
Yeah, let's go back
so
to
we ended up you ended up spending nearly £250,000. Sorry.
yeah, no, Yeah, I mean that. Yes, that's true.
How do you? I was just going to say, how do you feel about that? But
But
you,
when you say it like that, I don't feel great. So when I remember when my accountant rang me up a few years ago, like at the accountancy firm, a new, younger minion had come in to take over doing my books, and he was not familiar with my backstory. And he phoned up and he said, just want to clarify. So he said, so the company owes you £100,000. It's like, what does that mean? When you say it like that, it sounds really bad. It was yeah. I mean, I don't know. How do I feel? Look, I feel really pleased. I feel really proud that I made that film. You know, I'm happy with my life. I'm very very aware of the sort of fortune. You know, I have a partner who's got a solid employed job,
mm,
and I mean, we've had lots of conversations about this, and he reassures me often, but I do often feel bad that it's like I'm the one that just is going off following my dreams, and he was like, well, I don't really have any creative dreams. Like, what
mm,
makes me happy is that you're doing yours. um but I couldn't be doing, well, no, maybe it's
mm,
not true to say. I guess if I wasn't with him, well, I don't know, it's all counterfactual, isn't it? But like, if I didn't have the kids, I guess I was making it work financially before I had kids.
mm.
So, but then there's also an age issue, mate. So even without the kids, I might have still been struggling to stay within the TV industry. I don't know. I don't feel bad. I mean, I feel kind of annoyed in a way when I look at this other stuff. Like, I've had a really great response to my film, and that's very nice.
Oh,
That's really
well,
gratifying. Like, from all kinds of unexpected places, really. Like, it's obviously it's sold all over the place. So I've got like kind of industry validation because these broadcasters have
yeah.
got, albeit for like €2,000 to show it a couple of times, which is just, there's issues there with that business model. The
Mm,
international sales was meant to be one of the ways that you could kind of recoup, but these numbers have just collapsed. But also, from all, like, from the nuclear industry, like activists, like all different people have been really, and they always say, I can't believe, like, I think the fact that I did just sort of do it on my own
mm,
makes it more valuable to those people. Like, they appreciate it more because they can see that there was no, well, there was no agenda other than just like my agenda that I wanted to decided this crazy thing to make this film, and I kind of followed my nose to do it. But I wasn't paid by anybody else to do that,
yeah.
and that's all great and everything. It's lovely. I'm really happy that people like it, and it's very nice to have people say nice things about it. But then it is depressing then to kind of turn the TV on, or I don't know. I mean, it's just a much bigger question about the world, isn't it? But like,
Mm,
that there is money around. It's plenty of money, but where is it going? Like, it's not going
mm,
to films like mine or any kind of independent documentaries, really. I mean, there was this brief golden moment in the last sort of decade when Netflix and Apple
mm.
and other streamers that have, like CNN briefly, were making and buying like sort of serious political documentaries. And now you just realize they were just doing that to get their subscribers in. Now they've got their subscribers
Mm.
doing that now. And it is, so, I'm happy that I've made that film, but I'd love to make more films like that, but I
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you.
can't do that process again. I just,
Yeah, but presumably you learned a lot from making the film that
I
you
did, but
would.
the depressing thing is that I think a lot of even the kind of scrabbling it together things that I did on that film, would not be possible to
Wouldn't be
do
able
now.
to do.
ES has gone. Crowdfunding, I think, has just got so much harder because, well, the
Mm,
cost of living for one, but also there's just so many more. It was a kind of a novelty when I was
yeah,
first doing it. Now people are asking you for money. We're all on Substack doing it, aren't we? Asking people
yeah,
to subscribe. Like, people are just, and all of those streamers that we weren't all paying for, Amazon Prime and Netflix and Disney Plus and all of
yeah.
these every month. It's just harder. The funding, kind of institutional funding, is kind of collapsed. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, and I've been a bit of a sort of crisis all the time of like, can I still be calling myself a filmmaker? Like, I last made a film 5 years ago.
No,
Um,
you definitely can though,
I,
because
I want to make, but
there's
I'm sort
plenty
of,
of people. I was thinking that actually about being an author, because
yeah,
it was 5 years between books actually until this year.
okay.
But then also I was thinking like, how long can you go if I didn't, how long can you, but I know authors who are
You feel that as well.
authors,
That's
and it's a long, yeah, it's a long time since their last book came out. and you're still an author. But I mean, it's such a massive achievement to make
Yeah,
an
it is a
independent
massive
film and
achievement, but
have
it's
it
also
on,
like how long can you keep
Netflix and
coasting
Disney and
on?
whatever else.
Yes,
Do
it
you
is.
know if you, or when, I should say, when you get to make the next one, do you know what it would be about?
Well, there's a short film that I want to, I keep saying I want to make it this year, but because everything is, I just feel like I'm moving very, very slowly. So I'm constantly like pushing
And
back.
also, the year's moving very, very quickly. It's nearly
Yes,
June.
that's what it is. It's not me. It's just time around
No,
the
it's not you. It's time.
Well, there's a short. So I think what I may do when I've started the Atom film, and like I said, the first, to start with, I made a bunch of short films, and they are obviously just easier because they don't cost as much and they don't take as long
Mm.
to do. I think I kind of would like to go back to that maybe to start with, just to sort of almost like I feel like I'm getting a little bit of a mental block. Like I just said, like, am I actually still a filmmaker? Like, do I still know how to do it? You know. So I think doing a couple of shorts maybe would be good. Still I'm just really super interested in like this whole world of like nuclear stuff. And I've met loads of really interesting people, like academics and artists and all kinds of people. So the first film that I think I'm going to do, what I plan to do, is with this amazing novelist that I met through the film. She wrote a novel called The Half-Life of Snails. I recommend it. It's called Philippa Holloway. And she went to the exclusion zone, the Chernobyl exclusion zone, for her research. It's set during the Maidan Revolution in Ukraine, so from sort of 10 or so years ago. And so I met her at various kind of like nuclear other panels and things. Anyway, she's really great, but she's got this quite rare chronic health condition. Now her son's a teenager, older teenager now, but her son's also autistic. So we had this kind of like bonding because my son's been going through
Mm.
the diagnosis process. Um, but she wrote this amazing little mini memoir that kind of weaves together the impacts of her health condition and sort of it's a hidden disability really. She's talked about like having to come to terms. She works at a university, so like creative writer, lecturer, and that's another whole depressing tale about what's happening in universities. Uh,
Yeah.
she said at a certain point she had to, I think, somebody in the management or whatever had talked about making accommodations for her disability, and she was like kind of taken aback at like kind of
Mm.
claiming that yes, I have a disability and I need this.
Yeah.
But it's the mini memoir that it like explores that, and then it's called Energy Crisis. It's about different forms of energy. So nuclear is in there, but also coal.
Okay.
Grew up in the East Midlands, like coal fields, but also wind and solar and things. And it's a really beautiful. She's an amazing writer. So we've been talking for a long time about doing something using some of her words.
Yeah, that sounds really
I
interesting.
think it would be really lovely. And I just keep talking about it, but I think I'm manifesting it. I think by like I
Mm.
did that with my big film. Like I was seeing that film in my head for a long time before it
Yeah.
existed. So I think I'm sort of in that phase. I'd like to do that. There's another thing about nuclear colonialism is a whole area that I've kind of been learning about.
Yeah.
The way things have been, a lot of nuclear testing, mining, just as is so often the way, is often on like indigenous land. Some kind of just uh,
Mm.
terrible legacies really for these communities. And there's various projects going on. There's a really interesting the thing I'd like to do is a little story I came across about some Greenham Common women in the 80s who they literally went out to the testing ground in New Mexico. And I didn't realize that we tested British nuclear weapons at Alamogordo at the American testing ground, which I didn't know.
Mm.
They went, this was in the mid 80s. They were, young. They were probably in their 20s or 30s then. They went to ground zero and they just stood on the testing ground so that this test could not happen because it was underground testing.
Yeah.
They were arrested, and then like there was a big trial in America. They came back to the UK. They like tried to break into a garden party at Buckingham Palace. They was like amazing women.
Yeah, they were
More
amazing.
attention to this story, and I'd like to do. I've met a couple of these women, talked to them, and I'd quite like to do something with some animation perhaps around that.
Yeah.
So there are a couple of short things I'd like to do. There are some other bigger, longer term. I really want to do. I'm really sort of slightly borderline obsessed with kind of boarding schools and like the grip of boarding schools on our imagination.
Yeah.
Partly, I mean, my school was not a boarding school, but it was a private school. Um, So it's kind of wildly different from kind of what I've done before.
Yeah.
Sort of
Where
feel
does those, probably should have asked you this before now, but where did the nuclear obsession come from?
well,
Because,
it was
you know, I'm
random. Yeah.
very slow at making connections. I don't know whether I always have been or whether it is a perimenopause thing, but quite often I'll be like, oh, and it was literally only reading your post when you mentioned threads.
Yeah.
I thought my whole, I mean, I'm Gen X, so my
Yeah.
teenage years was
Yeah.
just nuclear terror. I didn't see threads. The cover of the Radio Times was enough. Like When the Wind Blows,
Yeah.
all of the songs, all of the
Yeah.
nuclear songs of the 80s. You know, I literally used to go to bed at night and think, well, probably not going to wake up
Yeah.
tomorrow. Or, you know, I can remember looking out and seeing like a very bright purpley pink sunset and thinking that meant that the bomb had dropped somewhere and that was the, you know, how long before it gets to me. I
Yeah.
obviously had a very overactive imagination, still do,
But it
but
was
that was a
it
big
was
thing
really in
for
the
me.
culture then, wasn't it? In the 80s,
Yeah, it
it
was
was
really in the
in the culture in a
culture.
way that it's not now, when arguably we're actually, the threat is actually bigger probably than it was then. So the
Well,
art,
I've talked to my kids actually. There's fairly recent, well, a few, no, it's probably there was I can't even remember where it was now because it's always somewhere. But my eldest said to me one day, asked me about it, and I was telling him this. I was saying, you know, it was the big kind of terror of my teens. And then that night, the next morning, he said he'd had like his first nuclear war dream, and
oh
I was like, oh my
wow,
God, I'm so sorry. I've given you generational nuclear trauma. I'm so sorry.
oh wow.
But then my youngest, when I told my youngest what your film was about, he was like, oh, my favorite. He's really interested in.
Yeah, it's very
Um,
interesting. Well, so the answer to it, there's two, it's sort of twofold, I think. I was doing a lot of Greenpeace campaigning then, uh,
mm,
and it was around that 2006, seven time is when I first sort of was when I had the idea to do something about it. I was fed up of telly, and I was like, I want to go and do something else. But then
yeah.
I realised that actually I wasn't really qualified to do anything else, and anything else like to go
Mm.
and do a gap year or something, you had to raise a load of money to do all these projects. So I thought, well, if I'm going to raise some money, why don't I raise some money and make a documentary about
What you
something?
done?
That's what I
Yeah.
want to do. So it was so random. So I was on a stall, like a street stall, getting people to sign postcards on Wimbledon High Street. And I was talking to my friend about it, and he said, what about nuclear power? Because it was when Tony Blair was talking about that we needed more nuclear power. And so I'm a bit younger than you. I was 9 when Chernobyl
Mm.
happened, so I remembered that, but I wasn't totally clear of the distinction between, Chernobyl, Hiroshima. They were all kind of
Yeah.
nuclear things, and I was like, I was just really surprised that nuclear power was. I thought it was this gone, scary thing from the past that was
Yeah.
dead and buried. So I was like, oh, that's interesting. And I thought, oh, maybe I can make a film that would contribute to this debate about should we have more nuclear.
Yeah.
I had no idea that it can take 10 years to do it. So that was the that was the visible thing that I was aware of. But actually, like, especially since the film's been out and I've been having all these really cool conversations with people while I've been taking it, doing screenings and things. Um, a couple of years before that, so my brother moved. My brother lived in Japan for 20 years. He moved out there
Mm.
in 2003, and I went to visit him in 2004. And he and I went to Hiroshima together,
Mm.
and that was one of the most kind of impactful things that I've ever
Yeah.
done in my life.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable, really, to be there. And so I think actually looking back, maybe that was in there as well. It was why
Mm.
I kind of seized on nuclear as an issue. I was so surprised to hear that maybe it was coming back. Because again,
Yeah.
it's like I hadn't disentangled like nuclear power from nuclear weapons quite.
Okay, weapons, yeah.
So yeah, that's where it came from, and I never, I would have never. Thankfully, it has proven to be something that I've remained really super interested in because it's like it can be. It's a way to look at just so many things. Like I had
Yeah.
through those years I was making, I kept having these like another wave of revelation. I was like, oh, actually, it's about this. Actually, it's about democracy, or actually, it's about gender, or actually, it's about
Yeah.
there's so many ways you can kind of look at it, and also just like I have found with friends of mine who've got university age kids or older kids, yeah, they are really positive about it. Climate change is real, it's here, and the nuclear industry has done a fantastic job of its messaging that it's a
Mm.
part of tackling climate change. I am not at all convinced that it is going to be because it hasn't been. It's been saying that for all of the years since I've been making my film.
Yeah, I feel like the conversation, well, I mean, it changes, but nothing actually.
That's the thing. Like
I
the
mean, I
vibes
think back
change,
to,
conversation,
yeah,
and the vibes change, but the actual power stations are not being built.
yeah. I mean, I'm still reading. I bought a magazine. I bought a Cosmopolitan magazine, which I think was from 1989, maybe. Bought
Wow.
it on eBay, and there was an article in there about like green issues that could be written today. It was really there was quite a few things in that. There was things
I've
in there
got
about gender and just
I've got a
it would you wouldn't know it was old.
Blue Peter annual from around that time,
Yeah.
with like acid rain and
Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing. I think the terminology changed. It's like somebody every now and then will be like, "Whatever happened to the hole in the ozone layer?" And
we
it's
fixed
like
it.
the
We fixed
terminology.
the hole in the
We fix
ozone.
it, yeah.
That's a positive story.
Yeah,
You know?
and we fix it with where did I heard it on something recently. We fix it with governments coming
Yes, it
together
was a
and
global
making an
agreement and
agreement
global action.
rather
And
than our little rubbish
yeah,
squirty hairspray that didn't work.
yeah.
Yeah,
Solutions are,
so it can be done.
always political. It's not generally sort of tech bros stuff.
Individual.
But yeah. Anyway,
Yeah.
so there we are.
Anyway.
We've talked for such a long time. Um,
Yeah.
I'm such a windbag, so
No, no, but it's
I'm
so
getting
interesting. It's also, and it's interesting, it's literally reading your Substack and just thinking, I don't understand any of this. I wouldn't have any idea of how to go about any of it. So it's so interesting to learn about it. And it is also, when you said that you're proud that you made it, you should be proud because it's
yeah,
how
yeah,
many people actually get to make an independent
yeah.
film that
And
is then,
I have to remind myself of that, because it's so
yeah,
easy. It's always very easy to compare yourself to these. And I'm doing it
yeah,
at the moment now. Like I still just will see people I used to work with. In fact, I just
yeah,
happened to saw on LinkedIn a guy a couple of years younger than me that I first worked with, 20 years ago. And actually, I don't know how I was annoyed with myself that I had missed this, but he had directed a film about the British nuclear test program on Channel
oh,
4,
wow,
which I don't know why that. A lot of things passed me by because when I had a baby and I've been a bit busy.
yeah,
But I was a bit like, oh, what? Like
yeah,
he will have just been paid by Channel 4 and the production company.
yeah,
He's made this film and like, I'd have loved to have made that film, and then you get this
yeah.
kind of pang of like, oh, why not me? But then I have to remember, well, I've made, you don't get one without the other. Like there was a lot of things about the industry that I really didn't like, and
Yeah,
I wasn't getting those opportunities. That's why I went a different
yeah,
way. So I have to, and
yeah,
also, like you said, I want to spend time with my children. I'm making choices all the time
yeah,
to prioritize other things. So you have to be at peace with what you choose to do, I guess. But it is.
yeah. It's hard.
I do feel proud. It's like you with with all your books, and it's easy to. I guess if you're the person who's done a thing because you did it, it's almost like it doesn't seem so impressive to you because you did it.
Yeah,
Other,
absolutely. I always just kind of think, well, if I can do it, it's not hard.
I feel completely the same. I did an English literature degree. I'm like a massive
Yeah,
book,
me too. At
and
Salford, though.
and I'm like all the so through Substack, I've been kind of meeting people, and like Philippa the novelist, people meeting who've had books published, and I feel the same, like, oh wow, like it's just
Yeah.
amazing, like having a book published and being in this world. It just feels this like super exciting, like I can
Yeah, I have to try to
reimagine.
remind myself of when
Yeah,
it used to be like, I could imagine getting a book published and
yeah,
it was a, dream. And then now
yeah,
it's like, and also it's like the industry kind of grinds you down and sucks all of the joy out of it.
yeah,
So then it's like, oh, a book's coming out. And I
yeah.
have to remind myself that A, it's an achievement, and B, that I should celebrate it and be
Yeah.
excited about it. But yeah, it is, it's
I think there's
hard.
a bit of human nature as well, isn't there? That we always kind of
Yeah.
we're climbing the mountain, then we get to the top of the mountain, and then we're immediately there's another mountain
If
over.
there's another mountain. Yeah. Yeah.
Don't ever stop, like, oh, I'm at the top of the mountain. Uh,
Yeah, but it's important, I think, to actually, yeah, celebrate achievements, or
Definitely
even not even celebrate them, just notice them.
notice them. Yeah.
Yeah,
I remember somebody said to me when my son was little that and he did not he's I don't know if it's related. It probably is because now he's neurodivergent, but he did not sleep. Like he was just completely
mm,
allergic to sleep. He was extremely anxious, just didn't sleep, and so hence I didn't sleep. And I
yeah,
remember somebody said to me, but like I know it's really hard, but like these are the good old days. Like you will look back and you will miss that. And so I would be like lying there with him, trying to get him to sleep, going, these are the good old days. And it's true. Like now I look back
yeah,
and he's kind of on the brink of being smelly teenage boy. And I remember that
Yeah,
little.
I've got two of them.
Yeah. So you do have to just like stop and remind yourself all the time, don't you? To
Yeah, you really do.
Well, awesome.
Okay.
Thank you so much.